Three Parables, a spiritual short story by Leo Tolstoy. The first parable. A weed had spread over a beautiful meadow, and in order to get rid of it, the tenants of the meadow mowed it, but the weed only increased in consequence. And now the kind, wise master came to visit the tenants of the meadow, and among the other good counsels which he gave them, he told them they ought not to mow the weed, since that only made it grow the more luxuriantly, but that they must pull it up by the roots. But either because the tenants of the meadow did not, among the other prescriptions of the good master, take heed of his advice not to mow down the weed, but to pull it up, or because they did not understand him, or because, according to their calculations, it seemed foolish to obey. The result was that his advice not to mow the weed but to pull it up was not followed, just as if he had never proffered it, and the men went on mowing the weed and spreading it. And although, during the succeeding years, there were men that reminded the tenants of the meadow of the advice of the kind, wise master, they did not heed them, and continued to do as before, so that mowing of the weed as soon as it began to appear became not only a custom, but even a sacred tradition, and the meadow grew more and more infested. And the matter went so far that the meadow grew nothing but weeds, and men lamented this, and invented all kinds of means to correct the evil. But the only one they did not use was that which had long ago been prescribed by their kind, wise master. And now, as time went on, it occurred to one man who saw the wretched condition into which the meadow had fallen, and who found among the master's forgotten prescriptions the rule not to mow the weed, but to pull it up by the root. It occurred to the man, I say, to remind the tenants of the meadow that they were acting foolishly, and that their folly had long ago been pointed out by the kind, wise master. But what do you think, instead of putting credence in the correctness of this man's recollections, and in case they proved to be reliable, ceasing to mow the weed, and in case he were mistaken, proving to him the incorrectness of his recollections, or stigmatizing the good, wise master's recommendations as impracticable and not obligatory upon them? The tenants of the meadow did nothing of the sort, but they took exception to this man's recollections and began to abuse him. Some called him a conceited fool who imagined that he was the only one to understand the master's regulations. Others called him a malicious, false interpreter and slanderer. Still others, forgetting that he was not giving them his own opinions, but was only reminding them of the prescriptions of the wise master whom they all revered, called him a dangerous man because he wished to pull up the weed and deprive them of their meadow. "He says we ought not to mow the meadow," said they, purposely suppressing the fact that the man did not say that it was not necessary to destroy the weed, but said that they should pull it up by the roots instead of mowing it. But if we do not destroy the weed, then it will spread and wholly ruin our meadow. And why was the meadow granted to us if we must train the weed in it? And the general impression that this man was either a fool or a false interpreter, or had the purpose of injuring the people, became so deeply grounded that everyone cast reproaches and ridicule upon him. And however earnestly he asseverated that he not only did not desire to spread the weed, but on the contrary considered that the destruction of the weed was one of the chief duties of the agriculturist, just as it was meant by the good, wise master whose words he merely repeated. Still, they would not listen to him because they had definitely made up their minds that he was either a conceited fool, misinterpreting the good, wise master's words, or a villain trying to induce men not to destroy the weeds, but to protect and spread them more widely. The same thing took place in my own case when I pointed out the injunction of the evangelical teaching about the non-resistance of evil by violence. This rule was laid down by Christ and after him in all times by all his true disciples. But either because they did not notice this rule, or because they did not understand it, or because its fulfillment seemed to them too difficult, as time went, the more completely this rule was forgotten, the farther the manner of men's lives departed from this rule. And finally, it came to the pass to which it has now come that this rule has already begun to seem to people something new, strange, unheard of, and even foolish. And I, also, have the same experience as the man had who reminded men of the good, wise master's prescription to refrain from mowing the weed, but to pull it up by the roots. As the tenants of the meadow purposely shut their eyes to the fact that the council was not to give up destroying the weed, but to destroy it by a different method, and said, "We will not listen to this man. He is a fool. He forbids us to mow down the weeds and tells us to pull them up." So in reply to my reminder that according to Christ's teaching, in order to annihilate evil, we must not employ violence against it, but must destroy it from the root with love, men said, "We will not listen to him. He is a fool. He advises not to oppose evil to evil, so that evil may overwhelm us." I said that according to Christ's teaching, evil cannot be eradicated by evil, that all resistance of evil by violence only intensifies the evil, that according to Christ's teaching, evil is eradicated by good. Bless them that curse you, pray for them that abuse you, do good to them that hate you, love your enemies, and you will have no enemies. I said that, according to Christ's teaching, the whole life of man is a battle with evil, a resistance of evil by reason and love, but that out of all the methods of resisting evil, Christ accepted only the one unreasonable method of resisting evil with violence, which is equivalent to fighting evil with evil. And I was misunderstood as saying that Christ taught that we must not resist evil, and all those whose lives were based on violence, and to whom in consequence violence was dear, were glad to take such a misconstruction of my words, and at the same time of Christ's words. And it was avowed that the teaching of non-resistance of evil was incredible, stupid, godless, and dangerous. And men calmly continue under the guise of destroying evil to make it more widely spread. The second parable. Men were trafficking in flour, butter, milk, and all kinds of foodstuffs. And as each one was desirous of receiving the greatest profit and becoming rich as soon as possible, all these men got more and more into the habit of adulterating their goods with cheap and injurious mixtures. With the flour they mixed bran and lime, they put oleomargarine into their butter, they put water and chalk into their milk. And until these goods reached the consumers, all went well. The wholesale traders sold them to the retailers, and the retailers distributed them in small quantities. There were many stores and shops, and the wares, it seemed, went off very rapidly, and the tradesmen were satisfied. But the city consumers, those that did not raise their own produce and were therefore obliged to buy it, found it very harmful and disagreeable. The flour was bad, the butter and milk were bad. But as there were no other wares except those adulterated to be had in the city markets, the city consumers continued to buy them, and they complained because the food tasted bad and was unwholesome. They blamed themselves and ascribed it to the wretched way in which the food was prepared. Meantime, the tradespeople continued more and more flagrantly to adulterate their foodstuffs with cheap foreign ingredients. Thus passed a sufficiently long time. The city people were all suffering, and no one had the resolution to express his dissatisfaction. And it happened that a housekeeper who had always given her family food and drink of her own came to the city. This woman had spent her whole life in the preparation of food, and though she was not a famous cook, still she knew very well how to bake bread and to cook good dinners. This woman bought various articles in the city and began to bake and cook. Her loaves did not rise, but fell. Her cakes, owing to the oleomargarine butter, seemed tasteless. She set her milk, but there was no cream. The housekeeper instantly came to the conclusion that her purchases were poor. She examined them, and her surmises were confirmed. She found lime in the flour, oleomargarine in the butter, chalk in the milk. Finding that all the materials she had bought were adulterated, the housekeeper went to the bazaars and began in a loud voice to accuse the tradesmen and to demand that they should either stock their shops with good, nutritious, unadulterated articles, or else cease to trade and shut up shop. But the tradesmen paid no attention to the housekeeper, but told her that their goods were first class, that the whole city had been buying of them for so many years, and that they even had medals, and they showed her their medals on their signs. but the housekeeper did not give in. "I don't need any medals," said she, "but wholesome food, so that I and my children may not have stomach troubles from it." "Apparently, my good woman, you have never seen genuine flour and butter," said the tradesman, showing her the white, pure-looking flour in varnished bins, the wretched imitation of butter lying in neat dishes, and the white fluid in glittering, transparent jars. "Of course I know them," replied the housekeeper, "because all my life long I have had to do with them, and I have cooked with them and have eaten them, I and my children. Your goods are adulterated. Here is the proof of it," said she, displaying the spoiled bread, the oleomargarine in the cakes, and the sediment in the milk. "You ought to throw all this stuff of yours into the river or burn it, and get unadulterated goods instead." And the woman, standing in front of the shops, kept incessantly crying her one message to the purchasers who came by, and the purchasers began to be troubled. Then, perceiving that this audacious housekeeper was likely to injure their wares, the tradesman said to the purchasers, "Look here, gentlemen, what a lunatic this woman is. She wants people to perish of starvation. She insists on our burning up and destroying all our provisions. What would you have to eat if we should heed her and refuse to sell you our goods? Do not listen to her. She is a coarse countrywoman, and she is no judge of provisions, and it is nothing but envy which makes her attack us. She is poor, and wants everyone else to be as poor as she is." Thus spoke the tradesman to the gathering throng, purposely blinking the fact that the woman wanted, not that all provisions should be destroyed, but that good ones should be substituted for bad. And thereupon the throng fell upon the woman and began to beat her. And though she assured them all that she had no wish to destroy the foodstuffs, that on the contrary, she had all her life been occupied in feeding others and herself, but that she only wanted that those men that took upon themselves the feeding of the people should not poison them with deleterious adulterations pretending to be edible. Though she pleaded her cause eloquently, they refused to hear her because their minds were made up that she wanted to deprive people of the food which they needed. The same thing has happened to me in regard to the art and science of our day. All my life long I have been fed on this food, and to the best of my ability I have attempted to feed others on it. And as this for me is a food, and not an object of traffic or luxury, I know beyond a question when food is food, and when it is only a counterfeit. And now, when I made trial of the food, which in our time began to be offered for sale in the intellectual bazaar under the guise of art and science, and attempted to feed those dear to me with it, I discovered that a large part of this food was not genuine. And when I declared that the art and the science on sale in the intellectual bazaar are margarined, or at least contain great mixtures of what is foreign to true art and true science, and that I know this because the produce I have bought in the intellectual bazaar has been proved to be not merely disadvantageous to me and those near and dear to me, but positively deleterious, then I was hooted at and abused, and it was insinuated that I did this because I was untrained and could not properly treat of such lofty objects. When I began to show that the dealers themselves in these intellectual wares were all the time charging one another of cheating, when I called to mind that in all times under the name of art and science much that was bad and harmful was offered to men, and that consequently in our time also the same danger was threatening, that this was no joke, that the poison for the soul was many times more dangerous than a poison for the body, and that therefore these spiritual products ought to be examined with the greatest attention when they are offered to us, in the form of food, and everything counterfeit and deleterious ought to be rejected. When I began to say this, no one, not a single man in a single article or book made reply to these arguments, but from all the shops there was a chorus of cries against me as against the woman. "He is a fool. He wants to destroy art and science which we live by. Beware of him and do not heed him. Hear us, hear us. We have the very latest foreign wares." The third parable. Travellers were making a journey, and they happened to lose their way, so that they found themselves proceeding, not on a smooth road, but across a bog, among clumps of bushes, briars, and fallen trees, which blocked their progress. and even to move grew more and more difficult. Then the travellers divided into two parties. One decided not to stop, but to keep going in the direction that they had been going, assuring themselves and the others that they had not wandered from the right road and were sure to reach their journey's end. The other party decided that, as the direction in which they were now going was evidently not the right one, otherwise they would long ago have reached the journey's end, it was necessary to find the road, and in order to find it, it was requisite that without delay they should move as rapidly as possible in all directions. All the travellers were divided between these two opinions. Some decided to keep going straight ahead, the others decided to make trials in all directions. But there was one man who, without sharing either opinion, declared that before continuing in the direction in which they had been going, or beginning to move rapidly in all directions, hoping that by this means they might find the right way, it was necessary first of all to pause and deliberate on their situation, and then, after due deliberation, to decide on one thing or the other. But the travellers were so excited by the disturbance, were so alarmed at their situation, they were so desirous of flattering themselves with the hope that they had not lost their way, but had only temporarily wandered from the road, and would soon find it again. And, above all, they had such a desire to forget their terror by moving about that this opinion was met with universal indignation, with reproaches, and with the ridicule of those of both parties. "It is the advice of weakness, cowardice, sloth," they said. "It is a fine way to reach the end of our journey, sitting down and not moving from the place," cried others. "For this are we men, and for this is strength given us, to struggle and labour, conquering obstacles, and not pusillanimously giving in to them," exclaimed still others. And in spite of what was said by the man that differed from the rest, how if we proceeded in a wrong direction without changing it, we should never attain our goal, but go farther from it, and how we should never attain it either if we kept flying from one direction to another, and how the only means of attaining our goal was by taking observation from the sun or the stars, and thus finding what direction we must take to reach it, and having chosen it, to stick to it, and how to do this, it was necessary first of all to halt, and to halt not for the purpose of stopping, but to find the right way, and then unfalteringly to go in it, and how for either case it was necessary to stop and consider. In spite of all this argument, they refused to heed him, and the first division of the travellers went off in the direction in which they had been going, and the second division kept changing their course, but neither division succeeded in attaining their journey's end, but up to the present time, moreover, they have not yet escaped from the bushes and the briars, but are still lost. Exactly the same thing happened to me when I attempted to express my doubts as to whether the road which we have taken through the dark forest of the labour question and through the all-swallowing bog of the endless armament of the nations is exactly the right route by which we ought to go, that it is very possible that we have lost our way, and that therefore it might be well for us for a time to stop moving in that direction which is evidently wrong, and first of all to consider, by means of the universal and eternal laws of truth revealed to us, what the direction is by which we intend to go. No one replied to this. Not a person said, "We are not mistaken in our direction, and we are not gone astray. We are sure of this for this reason and for that." Not a person said, "Possibly we are mistaken, but we have an infallible means of correcting our error without ceasing to move." No one said either the one thing or the other, but all were indignant, took offence, and hastened to quench my solitary voice with a simultaneous outburst. "We are so indolent and backward, and this is the advice of indolence, sluggishness, inefficiency." Some even went so far as to add, "It's all nonsense. Don't listen to him. Follow us." And they shouted like those that reckon that salvation is to be found in unchangedly travelling a once selected road, whatever it may have been, like those also that expect to find salvation in flying about in all directions. Why wait? Why consider? Push forward. Everything will come out of itself. Men have lost their way and are suffering in consequence. It would seem that the first main application of energy which should be put forth ought to be directed, not to the confirmation of the movement that has seduced us into the false position where we are, but to the cessation of it. It would seem clear that as soon as we stopped, we might, in a measure, comprehend our situation and discover the direction in which we ought to go in order to attain true happiness, not for one man, not for one class of men, but that general good of humanity toward which all men are striving and every human heart by itself. But how is it? Men invent everything possible, but do not hit upon the one thing that might prove their salvation, or if it did not do that, might at least ameliorate their condition. I mean, that they should pause for a moment and not go on increasing their misfortunes by their fallacious activity. Men are conscious of the wretchedness of their condition, and are doing all they can to avoid it. But the one thing that would assuredly ameliorate it they are unwilling to do, and the advice given them to do it, more than anything else, rouses their indignation. If there were any possibility of doubting the fact that we have gone astray, then this treatment of the advice to think it over proves more distinctly than anything else how hopelessly astray we have gone, and how great is our despair. The Empty Drum, a magical parable by Leo Tolstoy. Emelian was a laborer and worked for a master. Crossing the meadows one day on his way to work, he nearly trod on a frog that jumped right in front of him, but he just managed to avoid it. Suddenly, he heard someone calling to him from behind. Emelian looked round and saw a lovely lassie who said to him, "Why don't you get married, Emelian?" "How can I marry, my lass?" said he. "I have but the clothes I stand up in, nothing more, and no one would have me for a husband." "Take me for a wife," said she. Emelian liked the maid. "I should be glad to," said he, "but where and how could we live?" "Why trouble about that?" said the girl. "One only has to work more and sleep less, and one can clothe and feed oneself anywhere." "Very well then, let us marry," said Emelian. "Where shall we go to?" "Let us go to town." So Emelian and the lass went to town, and she took him to a small hut on the very edge of the town, and they married and began housekeeping. One day the king, driving through the town, passed by Emelian's hut. Emelian's wife came out to see the king. The king noticed her and was quite surprised. "Where did such a beauty come from?" said he, and stopping his carriage, he called Emelian's wife and asked her, "Who are you?" "The peasant Emelian's wife," said she. "Why did you, who are such a beauty, marry a peasant?" said the king. "You ought to be a queen." "Thank you for your kind words," said she, "but a peasant husband is good enough for me." The king talked to her a while and then drove on. He returned to the palace, but could not get Emelian's wife out of his head. All night he did not sleep, but kept thinking how to get her for himself. He could think of no way of doing it, so he called his servants and told them they must find a way. The king's servants said, "Command Emelian to come to the palace to work, and we will work him so hard that he will die. His wife will be left a widow, and then you can take her for yourself." The king followed their advice. He sent an order that Emelian should come to the palace as a workman, and that he should live at the palace, and his wife with him. The messengers came to Emelian and gave him the king's message. His wife said, "Go, Emelian, work all day, but come back home at night." So Emelian went, and when he got to the palace, the king's steward asked him, "Why have you come alone, without your wife?" "Why should I drag her about?" said Emelian. "She has a house to live in." At the king's palace, they gave Emelian work enough for two. He began the job not hoping to finish it, but when evening came, lo and behold, it was all done. The steward saw that it was finished and set him 4 times as much for next day. Emelian went home. Everything there was swept and tidy. The oven was heated, his supper was cooked and ready, and his wife sat by the table sewing and waiting for his return. She greeted him, laid the table, gave him to eat and drink, and then began to ask him about his work. "Ah," said he, "it's a bad business. They give me tasks beyond my strength and want to kill me with work." "Don't fret about the work," said she. "Don't look either before or behind to see how much you have done or how much there is left to do. Only keep on working, and all will be right." So Emilian lay down and slept. Next morning he went to work again and worked without once looking round. And lo and behold! By the evening it was all done, and before dark he came home for the night. Again and again they increased Emilian's work, but he always got through it in good time and went back to his hut to sleep. A week passed, and the king's servants saw they could not crush him with rough work, so they tried giving him work that required skill. But this, also, was of no avail. Carpentering and masonry and roofing, whatever they set him to do, Emilian had it ready in time, and went home to his wife at night. So a second week passed. Then the king called his servants and said, "Am I to feed you for nothing? 2 weeks have gone, and I don't see that you have done anything. You are going to tire Emilian out with work, but I see from my windows how he goes home every evening, singing cheerfully. Do you mean to make a fool of me?" The king's servants began to excuse themselves. "We tried our best to wear him out with rough work," they said, "but nothing was too hard for him. He cleared it all off as though he had swept it away with a broom. There was no tiring him out. Then we set him to tasks needing skill, which we did not think he was clever enough to do, but he managed them all. No matter what one sets him, he does it all. No one knows how. Either he or his wife must know some spell that helps them. We ourselves are sick of him and wish to find a task he cannot master. We have now thought of setting him to build a cathedral in a single day. Send for Emilian and order him to build a cathedral in front of the palace in a single day. Then, if he does not do it, let his head be cut off for disobedience." The king sent for Emilian. "Listen to my command," said he. "Build me a new cathedral on the square in front of my palace, and have it ready by tomorrow evening. If you have it ready, I will reward you, but if not, I will have your head cut off." When Emilian heard the king's command, he turned away and went home. "My end is near," thought he, and coming to his wife, he said, "Get ready, wife. We must fly from here, or I shall be lost by no fault of my own." "What has frightened you so?" said she, "and why should we run away?" "How can I help being frightened? The king has ordered me, tomorrow, in a single day, to build him a cathedral. If I fail, he will cut my head off. There is only one thing to be done. We must fly while there is yet time." But his wife would not hear of it. "The king has many soldiers," said she. "They would catch us anywhere. We cannot escape from him, but must obey him as long as strength holds out." "How can I obey him when the task is beyond my strength?" Goodman, don't be downhearted. Eat your supper now and go to sleep. Rise early in the morning, and all will get done." So Emilian lay down and slept. His wife roused him early next day. "Go quickly," said she, "and finish the cathedral. Here are nails and a hammer. There is still enough work there for a day." Emilian went into the town, reached the palace square, and there stood a large cathedral not quite finished. Emilian set to work to do what was needed, and by the evening all was ready. When the king awoke, he looked out from his palace and saw the cathedral, and Emilian going about driving in nails here and there. And the king was not pleased to have the cathedral. He was annoyed at not being able to condemn Emilian and take his wife. Again he called his servants. "Emilian has done this task also," said the king, "and there is no excuse for putting him to death. Even this work was not too hard for him. You must find a more cunning plan, or I will cut off your heads as well as his." So his servants planned that Emilian should be ordered to make a river round the palace, with ships sailing on it. And the king sent for Emilian and set him this new task. "If," said he, "you could build a cathedral in one night, you can also do this. Tomorrow all must be ready. If not, I will have your head off." Emilian was more downcast than before and returned to his wife, sad at heart. "Why are you so sad?" said his wife. "Has the king set you a fresh task?" Emilian told her about it. "We must fly," said he. But his wife replied, "There is no escaping the soldiers. They will catch us wherever we go. There is nothing for it but to obey." "How can I do it?" groaned Emilian. Goodman," said she, "don't be downhearted. Eat your supper now and go to sleep. Rise early, and all will get done in good time." So Emilian lay down and slept. In the morning, his wife woke him. "Go," said she, "to the palace. All is ready. Only, near the wharf in front of the palace, there is a mound left. Take a spade and level it." When the king awoke, he saw a river where there had not been one. Ships were sailing up and down, and Emilian was leveling a mound with a spade. The king wondered, but was pleased neither with the river nor with the ships, so vexed was he at not being able to condemn Emilian. "There is no task," thought he, "that he cannot manage. What is to be done?" And he called his servants and again asked their advice. "Find some task," said he, "which Emilian cannot compass, for whatever we plan he fulfills, and I cannot take his wife from him." The king's servants thought, and at last devised a plan. They came to the king and said, "Send for Emilian and say to him, 'Go to there, don't know where, and bring back that, don't know what. Then he will not be able to escape you. No matter where he goes, you can say that he has not gone to the right place, and no matter what he brings, you can say it is not the right thing. Then you can have him beheaded and can take his wife.'" The king was pleased. "That is well thought of," said he. So the king sent for Emilian and said to him, "Go to there, don't know where, and bring back that, don't know what. If you fail to bring it, I will have you beheaded." Emilian returned to his wife and told her what the king had said. His wife became thoughtful. "Well," said she, "they have taught the king how to catch you. Now we must act warily." So she sat and thought, and at last said to her husband, "You must go far to our grandam, the old peasant woman, the mother of soldiers, and you must ask her aid. If she helps you to anything, go straight to the palace with it. I shall be there. I cannot escape them now. They will take me by force, but it will not be for long. If you do everything as grandam directs, you will soon save me." So the wife got her husband ready for the journey. She gave him a wallet and also a spindle. "Give her this," said she. "By this token she will know that you are my husband." And his wife showed him his road. Emilian set off. He left the town behind and came to where some soldiers were being drilled. Emilian stood and watched them. After drill, the soldiers sat down to rest. Then Emilian went up to them and asked, "Do you know, brothers, the way to there, don't know where, and how I can get that, don't know what?" The soldiers listened to him with surprise. "Who sent you on this errand?" said they. "The king," said he. "We ourselves," said they. "From the day we became soldiers, go we don't know where, and never yet have we got there, and we seek we don't know what, and cannot find it. We cannot help you." Emilian sat a while with the soldiers, and then went on again. He trudged many a mile, and at last came to a wood. In the wood was a hut, and in the hut sat an old woman, the mother of peasant soldiers, spinning flax and weeping. And as she spun, she did not put her fingers to her mouth to wet them with spittle, but to her eyes to wet them with tears. When the older woman saw Emilian, she cried out at him, "Why have you come here?" Then Emilian gave her the spindle and said his wife had sent it. The old woman softened at once and began to question him. And Emilian told her his whole life, how he married the lass, how they went to live in the town, how he had worked, and what he had done at the palace, how he built the cathedral and made a river with ships on it, and how the king had now told him to go to there, don't know where, and bring back that, don't know what." The grandam listened to the end and ceased weeping. She muttered to herself, "The time has surely come," and said to him, "All right, my lad, sit down now, and I will give you something to eat." Emelian ate, and then the grandam told him what to do. "Here," said she, "is a ball of thread. Roll it before you and follow where it goes. You must go far till you come right to the sea. When you get there, you will see a great city. Enter the city and ask for a night's lodging at the furthest house. They look out for what you are seeking." "How shall I know it when I see it, Granny?" said he. "When you see something men obey more than father or mother, that is it. Seize that and take it to the king. When you bring it to the king, he will say it is not right, and you must answer. If it is not the right thing, it must be smashed, and you must beat it and carry it to the river, break it in pieces, and throw it into the water. Then you will get your wife back, and my tears will be dried." Emelian bade farewell to the grandam and began rolling his ball before him. It rolled and rolled until at last it reached the sea. By the sea stood a great city, and at the further end of the city was a big house. There Emelian begged for a night's lodging and was granted it. He lay down to sleep, and in the morning awoke and heard a father rousing his son to go and cut wood for the fire. But the son did not obey. "It is too early," said he. "There is time enough." Then Emelian heard the mother say, "Go, my son. Your father's bones ache. Would you have him go himself? It is time to be up." But the son only murmured some words and fell asleep again. Hardly was he asleep when something thundered and rattled in the street. Up jumped the son, and quickly putting on his clothes ran out into the street. Up jumped Emelian too, and ran after him to see what it was that a son obeys more than father or mother. What he saw was a man walking along the street carrying, tied to his stomach, a thing which he beat with sticks, and that it was that rattled and thundered so, and that the son had obeyed. Emelian ran up and had a look at it. He saw it was round, like a small tub, with a skin stretched over both ends, and he asked what it was called. He was told, "A drum." "And is it empty?" "Yes, it is empty." Emelian was surprised. He asked them to give the thing to him, but they would not. So Emelian left off asking and followed the drummer. All day he followed, and when the drummer at last lay down to sleep, Emelian snatched the drum from him and ran away with it. He ran and ran, till at last he got back to his own town. He went to see his wife, but she was not at home. The day after he went away, the king had taken her, so Emelian went to the palace and sent in a message to the king. "He has returned who went to there, don't know where, and he has brought with him that, don't know what." They told the king, and the king said he was to come again next day. But Emelian said, "Tell the king I am here today, and have brought what the king wanted. Let him come out to me, or I will go in to him." The king came out. "Where have you been?" said he. Emelian told him. "That's not the right place," said the king. "What have you brought?" Emelian pointed to the drum, but the king did not look at it. "That is not it." "If it is not the right thing," said Emelian, "it must be smashed, and may the devil take it." And Emelian left the palace, carrying the drum and beating it. And as he beat it all, the king's army ran out to follow Emelian, and they saluted him and waited his commands. The king, from his window, began to shout at his army, telling them not to follow Emelian. They did not listen to what he said, but all followed Emelian. When the king saw that, he gave orders that Emelian's wife should be taken back to him, and he sent to ask Emelian to give him the drum. "It can't be done," said Emelian. "I was told to smash it and to throw the splinters into the river." So Emelian went down to the river carrying the drum, and the soldiers followed him. When he reached the river bank, Emelian smashed the drum to splinters and threw the splinters into the stream, and then all the soldiers ran away. Emelian took his wife and went home with her, and after that the king ceased to trouble him, and so they lived happily ever after. Leo Tolstoy's renderings of Hindu fables for children and for adults. The Snake's Head and Tail. The snake's tail had a quarrel with the snake's head about who was to walk in front. The head said, "You cannot walk in front because you have no eyes and no ears." The tail said, "Yes, but I have strength. I move you. If I want to, I can wind myself around a tree, and you cannot get off the spot." The head said, "Let us separate." And the tail tore himself loose from the head and crept on, but the moment he got away from the head, he fell into a hole and was lost. Fine thread. A man ordered some fine thread from a spinner. The spinner spun it for him, but the man said that the thread was not good and that he wanted the finest thread he could get. The spinner said, "If this is not fine enough, take this," and she pointed to an empty space. He said that he did not see any. The spinner said, "You do not see it because it is so fine. I do not see it myself." The fool was glad and ordered some more thread of this kind and paid her for what he got. The partition of the inheritance. A father had 2 sons. He said to them, "When I die, divide everything into 2 equal parts." When the father died, the sons could not divide without quarreling. They went to a neighbor to have him settle the matter. The neighbor asked them how their father had told them to divide. They said, "He ordered us to divide everything into 2 equal parts." The neighbor said, "If so, tear all your garments into 2 halves, break your dishes into 2 halves, and cut all your cattle into 2 halves." The brothers obeyed their neighbor and lost everything. The monkey. A man went into the woods, cut down a tree, and began to saw it. He raised the end of the tree on a stump, sat astride over it, and began to saw. Then he drove a wedge into the split that he had sawed and went on sawing. Then he took out the wedge and drove it in farther down. A monkey was sitting on a tree and watching him. When the man lay down to sleep, the monkey seated herself astride the tree and wanted to do the same. But when she took out the wedge, the tree sprang back and caught her tail. She began to tug and to cry. The man woke up, beat the monkey, and tied a rope to her. The monkey and the peas. A monkey was carrying both her hands full of peas. A pea dropped on the ground. The monkey wanted to pick it up and dropped 20 peas. She rushed to pick them up and lost all the rest. Then she flew into a rage, swept away all the peas, and ran off. The milch cow. A man had a cow. She gave each day a pot full of milk. The man invited a number of guests. To have as much milk as possible, he did not milk the cow for 10 days. He thought that on the 10th day, the cow would give him 10 pitchers of milk. But the cow's milk went back, and she gave less milk than before. The duck and the moon. A duck was swimming in the pond, trying to find some fish, but she did not find one in a whole day. When night came, she saw the moon in the water. She thought that it was a fish and plunged in to catch the moon. The other ducks saw her do it and laughed at her. That made the duck feel so ashamed and bashful that when she saw a fish under the water, she did not try to catch it, and so died of hunger. The wolf in the dust. A wolf wanted to pick a sheep out of a flock and stepped into the wind so that the dust of the flock might blow on him. The sheepdog saw him and said, "There is no sense, wolf, in your walking in the dust. It will make your eyes ache." But the wolf said, "The trouble is, doggy, that my eyes have been aching for quite a while, and I have been told that the dust from a flock of sheep will cure the eyes." The mouse under the granary. A mouse was living under the granary. In the floor of the granary there was a little hole, and the grain fell down through it. The mouse had an easy life of it, but she wanted to brag of her ease. She gnawed a larger hole in the floor and invited other mice. "Come to a feast with me," said she. "There will be plenty to eat for everybody." When she brought the mice, she saw there was no hole. The peasant had noticed the big hole in the floor and had stopped it up. The best pears. A master sent his servant to buy the best tasting pears. The servant came to the shop and asked for pears. The dealer gave him some, but the servant said, "No, give me the best." The dealer said, "Try one. You will see that they taste good." "How shall I know," said the servant, "that they all taste good if I try one only?" He bit off a piece from each pear and brought them to his master. Then his master sent him away. The Falcon and the Cock. The falcon was used to the master and came to his hand when he was called. The cock ran away from his master and cried when people went up to him. So the falcon said to the cock, "In you cocks there is no gratitude. One can see that you are of a common breed. You go to your masters only when you are hungry. It is different with us wild birds. We have much strength and we can fly faster than anybody. Still, we do not fly away from people, but of our own accord go to their hands when we are called. We remember that they feed us." Then the cock said, "You do not run away from people because you have never seen a roast falcon, but we, you know, see roast cocks." The Jackals and the Elephant. The jackals had eaten up all the carrion in the woods and had nothing to eat. So an old jackal was thinking how to find something to feed on. He went to an elephant and said, "We had a king, but he became overweening. He told us to do things that nobody could do. We want to choose another king, and my people have sent me to ask you to be our king. You will have an easy life with us. Whatever you will order us to do, we will do, and we will honor you in everything. Come to our kingdom." The elephant consented and followed the jackal. The jackal brought him to a swamp. When the elephant stuck fast in it, the jackal said, "Now command. Whatever you command, we will do." The elephant said, "I command you to pull me out from here." The jackal began to laugh and said, "Take hold of my tail with your trunk, and I will pull you out at once." The elephant said, "Can I be pulled out by a tail?" But the jackal said to him, "Why then do you command us to do what is impossible? Did we not drive away our first king for telling us to do what could not be done?" When the elephant died in the swamp, the jackals came and ate him up. The heron, the fishes, and the crab. A heron was living near a pond. She grew old and had no strength left with which to catch the fish. She began to contrive how to live by cunning. So she said to the fishes, "You fishes do not know that a calamity is in store for you. I have heard the people say that they are going to let off the pond and catch every one of you. I know of a nice little pond back of the mountain. I should like to help you, but I am old, and it is hard for me to fly." The fishes begged the heron to help them. So the heron said, "All right, I will do what I can for you, and will carry you over. Only I cannot do it at once. I will take you there one after another." And the fishes were happy. They kept begging her, "Carry me over, carry me over." And the heron started carrying them. She would take one up, would carry her into the field, and would eat her up. And thus she ate a large number of fishes. In the pond there lived an old crab. When the heron began to take out the fishes, he saw what was up and said, "Now, heron, take me to the new abode." The heron took the crab and carried him off. When she flew out on the field, she wanted to throw the crab down. But the crab saw the fish bones on the ground, and so squeezed the heron's neck with his claws and choked her to death. Then he crawled back to the pond and told the fishes. The Water Sprite and the Pearl. A man was rowing in a boat and dropped a costly pearl into the sea. The man returned to the shore, took a pail, and began to draw up the water and to pour it out on the land. He drew the water and poured it out for 3 days without stopping. On the fourth day, the water sprite came out of the sea and asked, "Why are you drawing the water?" The man said, "I am drawing it because I have dropped a pearl into it." The water sprite asked him, "Will you stop soon?" The man said, "I will stop when I dry up the sea." Then the water sprite returned to the sea, brought back that pearl, and gave it to the man. The blind man and the milk. A man born blind asked a seeing man, "Of what color is milk?" The seeing man said, "The color of milk is the same as that of white paper." The blind man asked, "Well, does that color rustle in your hands like paper?" The seeing man said, "No, it is as white flour." The blind man asked, "Well, is it as soft and as powdery as flour?" The seeing man said, "No, it is simply as white as a white hair." The blind man asked, "Well, is it as fluffy and soft as a hair?" The seeing man said, "No, it is as white as snow." The blind man asked, "Well, is it as cold as snow?" And no matter how many examples the seeing man gave, the blind man was unable to understand what the white color of milk was like. The Wolf and the Bow. A hunter went out to hunt with bow and arrows. He killed a goat. He threw her on his shoulders and carried her along. On his way, he saw a boar. He threw down the goat and shot at the boar and wounded him. The boar rushed against the hunter and butted him to death, and himself died on the spot. A wolf scented the blood and came to the place where lay the goat, the boar, the man, and his bow. The wolf was glad and said, "Now I shall have enough to eat for a long time. Only I will not eat everything at once, but little by little, so that nothing may be lost. First, I will eat the tougher things, and then I will lunch on what is soft and sweet." The wolf sniffed at the goat, the boar, and the man, and said, "This is all soft food, so I will eat it later. Let me first start on these sinews of the bow." And he began to gnaw the sinews of the bow. When he bit through the string, the bow sprang back and hit him on his belly. He died on the spot, and other wolves ate up the man, the goat, the boar, and the wolf. The Birds in the Net. A hunter set out a net near a lake and caught a number of birds. The birds were large, and they raised the net and flew away with it. The hunter ran after them. A peasant saw the hunter running and said, "Where are you running? How can you catch up with the birds while you are on foot?" The hunter said, "If it were one bird, I should not catch it, but now I shall." And so it happened. When evening came, the birds began to pull for the night, each in a different direction. One to the woods, another to the swamp, a third to the field, and all fell with the net to the ground, and the hunter caught them. The King and the Falcon. A certain king let his favorite falcon loose on a hare and galloped after him. The falcon caught the hare. The king took him away and began to look for some water to drink. The king found it on a knoll, but it came only drop by drop. The king fetched his cup from the saddle and placed it under the water. The water flowed in drops, and when the cup was filled, the king raised it to his mouth and wanted to drink it. Suddenly, the falcon fluttered on the king's arm and spilled the water. The king placed the cup once more under the drops. He waited for a long time for the cup to be filled even with the brim, and again, as he carried it to his mouth, the falcon flapped his wings and spilled the water. When the king filled his cup for the third time and began to carry it to his mouth, the falcon again spilled it. The king flew into a rage and killed him by flinging him against a stone with all his force. Just then, the king's servants rode up, and one of them ran uphill to the spring to find as much water as possible and to fill the cup. But the servant did not bring the water. He returned with the empty cup and said, "You cannot drink that water. There is a snake in the spring, and she has let her venom into the water. It is fortunate that the falcon has spilled the water. If you had drunk it, you would have died." The king said, How badly I have repaid the falcon. He has saved my life, and I killed him." The king and the elephants. An Indian king ordered all the blind people to be assembled, and when they came, he ordered that all the elephants be shown to them. The blind men went to the stable and began to feel the elephants. One felt a leg, another a tail, a third the stump of a tail, a fourth a belly, a fifth a back, a sixth the ears, a seventh the tusks, and an eighth a trunk. Then the king called the blind men and asked them, "What are my elephants like?" One blind man said, "Your elephants are like posts." He had felt the legs. Another blind man said, "They are like bath brooms." He had felt the end of the tail. A third said, "They are like branches." He had felt the tail stump. The one who had touched a belly said, "The elephants are like a clod of earth." The one who had touched the side said, "They are like a wall." The one who had touched a back said, "They are like a mound." The one who had touched the ears said, "They are like a mortar." The one who had touched the tusks said, "They are like horns." The one who had touched the trunk said that they were like a stout rope, and all the blind men began to dispute and to quarrel. Why there is evil in the world. A hermit was living in the forest, and the animals were not afraid of him. He and the animals talked together and understood each other. Once the hermit lay down under a tree, and a raven, a dove, a stag, and a snake gathered in the same place to pass the night. The animals began to discuss why there was evil in the world. The raven said, "All the evil in the world comes from hunger. When I eat my fill, I sit down on a branch and croak a little, and it is all jolly and good, and everything gives me pleasure. But let me just go without eating a day or two, and everything palls on me so that I do not feel like looking at God's world. And something draws me on, and I fly from place to place, and have no rest. When I catch a glimpse of some meat, it makes me only feel sicker than ever, and I make for it without much thinking. At times they throw sticks and stones at me, and the wolves and dogs grab me, but I do not give in. Oh, how many of my brothers are perishing through hunger. All evil comes from hunger." The dove said, "According to my opinion, the evil does not come from hunger, but from love. If we lived singly, the trouble would not be so bad. One head is not poor, and if it is only one. But here we live in pairs, and you come to like your mate so much that you have no rest. You keep thinking of her all the time, wondering whether she has had enough to eat and whether she is warm. And when your mate flies away from you, you feel entirely lost, and you keep thinking that a hawk may have carried her off, or men may have caught her. And you start out to find her and fly to your ruin, either into the hawk's claws or into a snare. And when your mate is lost, nothing gives you any joy. You do not eat or drink, and all the time search and weep. Oh, so many of us perish in this way. All the evil is not from hunger, but from love." The snake said, "No, the evil is not from hunger, nor from love, but from rage. If we lived peacefully, without getting into a rage, everything would be nice for us. But as it is, whenever a thing does not go exactly right, we get angry, and then nothing pleases us. All we think about is how to revenge ourselves on someone. Then we forget ourselves and only hiss and creep and try to find someone to bite, and we do not spare a soul. We even bite our own father and mother. We feel as though we could eat ourselves up, and we rage until we perish. All the evil in the world comes from rage." The stag said, "No, not from rage or from love or from hunger does all the evil in the world come, but from terror. If it were possible not to be afraid, everything would be well. We have swift feet and much strength. Against a small animal we defend ourselves with our horns, and from a large one we flee. But how can I help becoming frightened? Let a branch crackle in the forest or a leaf rustle, and I am all a-tremble with fear, and my heart flutters as though it wanted to jump out, and I fly as fast as I can. Again, let a hare run by, or a bird flap its wings, or a dry twig break off, and you think that it is a beast, and you run straight up against him. Or you run away from a dog and run into the hands of a man. Frequently you get frightened and run, not knowing whither, and at full speed rush down a steep hill and get killed. We have no rest. All the evil comes from terror." Then the hermit said, "Not from hunger, not from love, not from rage, not from terror are all our sufferings, but from our bodies comes all the evil in the world. From them come hunger and love and rage and terror." The wolf and the hunters. A wolf devoured a sheep. The hunters caught the wolf and began to beat him. The wolf said, "In vain do you beat me. It is not my fault that I am grey. God has made me so." But the hunters said, "We do not beat the wolf for being grey, but for eating the sheep." The two peasants. Once upon a time, two peasants drove toward each other and caught in each other's sleighs. One cried, "Get out of my way, I am hurrying to town." But the other said, "Get out of my way, I am hurrying home." They quarrelled for some time. A third peasant saw them and said, "If you are in a hurry, back up." The peasant and the horse. A peasant went to town to fetch some oats for his horse. He had barely left the village when the horse began to turn around toward the house. The peasant struck the horse with his whip. She went on and kept thinking about the peasant. "Whither is that fool driving me? He had better go home." Before reaching town, the peasant saw that the horse trudged along through the mud with difficulty, so he turned her on the pavement. But the horse began to turn back from the street. The peasant gave the horse the whip and jerked at the reins. She went on the pavement and thought, "Why has he turned me on the pavement? It will only break my hoofs. It is rough underfoot." The peasant went to the shop, bought the oats, and drove home. When he came home, he gave the horse some oats. The horse ate them and thought, "How stupid men are! They are fond of exercising their wits on us, but they have less sense than we. What did he trouble himself about? He drove me somewhere. No matter how far we went, we came home in the end. So it would have been better if we had remained at home from the start. He could have been sitting on the oven and I eating oats." The two horses. Two horses were drawing their carts. The front horse pulled well, but the hind horse kept stopping all the time. The load of the hind horse was transferred to the front cart. When all was transferred, the hind horse went along with ease and said to the front horse, "Work hard and sweat. The more you try, the harder they will make you work." When they arrived at the tavern, their master said, "Why should I feed two horses and haul with one only? I shall do better to give one plenty to eat, and to kill the other. I shall at least have her hide." So he did. The axe and the saw. Two peasants went to the forest to cut wood. One of them had an axe and the other a saw. They picked out a tree and began to dispute. One said that the tree had to be chopped, while the other said that it had to be sawed down. A third peasant said, "I will easily make peace between you. If the axe is sharp, you had better chop it, but if the saw is sharp, you had better saw it." He took the axe and began to chop it, but the axe was so dull that it was not possible to cut with it. Then he took the saw. The saw was worthless and did not saw. So he said, "Stop quarrelling a while. The axe does not chop, and the saw does not saw. First grind your axe and file your saw, and then quarrel." But the peasants grew angrier still at one another, because one had a dull axe, and the other a dull saw, and they came to blows. The dogs and the cook. A cook was preparing a dinner. The dogs were lying at the kitchen door. The cook killed a calf and threw the guts out into the yard. The dogs picked them up and ate them and said, "He is a good cook. He cooks well." After a while, the cook began to clean peas, turnips, and onions and threw out the refuse. The dogs made for it, but they turned their noses up and said, "Our cook has grown worse. He used to cook well, but now he is no longer any good." But the cook paid no attention to the dogs and continued to fix the dinner in his own way. The family, and not the dogs, ate the dinner and praised it. The Hare and the Harrier. A hare once said to a harrier, "Why do you bark when you run after us? You would catch us easier if you ran after us in silence. With your bark, you only drive us against the hunter. He hears where we are running, and he rushes out with his gun and kills us, and does not give you anything." The harrier said, "That is not the reason why I bark. I bark because when I scent your odor, I am angry and happy because I am about to catch you. I do not know why, but I cannot keep from barking." The Oak and the Hazel Bush. An old oak dropped an acorn under a hazel bush. The hazel bush said to the oak, "Have you not enough space under your own branches? Drop your acorns in an open space. Here I am myself, crowded by my shoots, and I do not drop my nuts to the ground, but give them to men." "I have lived for 200 years, said the oak, "and the oakling which will sprout from that acorn will live just as long." Then the hazel bush flew into a rage and said, "If so, I will choke your oakling, and he will not live for 3 days." The oak made no reply, but told his son to sprout out of that acorn. The acorn got wet and burst, and clung to the ground with his crooked rootlet, and sent up a sprout. The hazel bush tried to choke him, and gave him no sun. But the oakling spread upwards and grew stronger in the shade of the hazel bush. 100 years passed. The hazel bush had long ago dried up, but the oak from that acorn towered to the sky and spread his tent in all directions. The Hen and the Chicks. A hen hatched some chicks, but did not know how to take care of them. So she said to them, "Creep back into your shells. When you are inside your shells, I will sit on you as before, and will take care of you." The chicks did as they were ordered, and tried to creep into their shells, but were unable to do so, and only crushed their wings. Then one of the chicks said to his mother, "If we are to stay all the time in our shells, you ought never to have hatched us." The Corncrake and his Mate. A corncrake had made a nest in the meadow late in the year, and at mowing time his mate was still sitting on her eggs. Early in the morning the peasants came to the meadow, took off the coats, whetted their scythes, and started one after another to mow down the grass and to put it down in rows. The corncrake flew up to see what the mowers were doing. When he saw a peasant swing his scythe and cut a snake in two, he rejoiced and flew back to his mate and said, "Don't fear the peasants. They have come to cut the snakes to pieces. They have given us no rest for quite a while." But his mate said, "The peasants are cutting the grass, and with the grass they are cutting everything which is in their way, the snakes and the corncrake's nest and the corncrake's head. My heart forebodes nothing good, but I cannot carry away the eggs, nor fly from the nest, for fear of chilling them." When the mowers came to the nest of the corncrake, one of the peasants swung his scythe and cut off the head of the corncrake's mate, and put the eggs in his bosom, and gave them to his children to play with. The Cow and the Billy Goat. An old woman had a cow and a billy goat. The two pastured together. At milking, the cow was restless. The old woman brought out some bread and salt and gave it to the cow and said, "Stand still, motherkin. Take it, take it. I will bring you some more. Only stand still." On the next evening, the goat came home from the field before the cow and spread his legs and stood in front of the old woman. The old woman wanted to strike him with the towel, but he stood still and did not stir. He remembered that the woman had promised the cow some bread if she would stand still. When the woman saw that he would not budge, she picked up a stick and beat him with it. When the goat went away, the woman began once more to feed the cow with bread and to talk to her. "There is no honesty in men," thought the goat. "I stood still better than the cow, and was beaten for it." He stepped aside, took a run, hit against the milk pail, spilled the milk, and hurt the old woman. The Fox's Tale. A man caught a fox and asked her, "Who has taught you foxes to cheat the dogs with your tails?" The fox asked, How do you mean to cheat? We do not cheat the dogs, but simply run from them as fast as we can. The man said, Yes, you do cheat them with your tails. When the dogs catch up with you and are about to clutch you, you turn your tails to one side. The dogs turn sharply after the tail, and then you run in the opposite direction. The fox laughed and said, We do not do so in order to cheat the dogs, but in order to turn around. When a dog is after us, and we see that we cannot get away straight ahead, we turn to one side, and in order to do that suddenly, we have to swing the tail to the other side, just as you do with your arms, when you have to turn around. That is not our invention. God himself invented it when he created us, so that the dogs might not be able to catch all the foxes.